All right, good morning. If everybody would please take a seat, we'll get started. My name is David Watson, and I am acting as the Associate Director for the NSBRI and also Chief Scientist. And it is my great pleasure to introduce this session, which includes many friends and colleagues, and I'm very much looking forward to it, so I won't belabor this. I just want to quickly introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Neil Pellis. I think he probably needs little or no introduction. I'll just tell you that he's currently acting as the Director of the Space Life Sciences Division at USRA here in Houston, and of course has been involved in biotechnology and cell science for many years, and he wanted me to remind everybody he's not the inventor, but certainly the popularizer of the rotating wall vessel. And he is going to chair this panel, and with that I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pellis.
Thanks, David, and thanks to Rice and the Baker Institute for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this. This is an area that a number of us have to deal with on a fairly regular basis, and we're always challenged in regards to this. What's the relevance of what we do, and how does it affect anybody's life? And so that's what we're talking about today. We've got a very, very august panel to do this. I'm going to try to do a short intro here in about 8 or 10 minutes of that at max, and then everybody gets their 5 minutes of fame, and I get the hook. Okay, so I hate to do that, but I promised Bobby that we would be right on time, and I'd like to have some time for you to ask some questions on this. The translation of space technologies, experimental findings, operational policies that we put together to Earth-based applications is something that I think that's sometimes hard to convey in the public arena. And obviously, at some time or another, we're going to have to get a better strategy in this because so few people know about it. When I actually say something in regards to this, they say, how come I never heard of that? And so we might address that question in part of our discussion groups later today and tomorrow. Why don't they know about it? But these innovations come in many different ways. There's manufacturing, material science, fluid and combustion physics, biomedical technologies, which is what our interest here today, all of these things have come from space research and space-based laboratories that are doing preparatory research for experiments in space. And so the panel today covers a very formidable breadth of influence in this area, disciplines from nearly all areas of biomedical research, technology development. And so taking advantage here to get a captured note from each one of these of some of the more stellar things that have taken place. Each panel member, unfortunately, has 5 minutes, okay, as I said before, and I have to reiterate that so that we don't get beyond that. It's difficult to be anywhere on Earth and not be influenced and or be the beneficiary of some terrestrially applied space research and technology. And you look around you and you try to figure out what is that and where did it come from. I've had people challenge me and say, well, I don't need you, I don't need a space program, and I won't tell you who that was, and I won't tell you the occasion, but it was a physician who said it. He said, you guys waste a lot of money. And the first thing that came to mind, I said, well, did you order a mammogram this week? And he said, of course. Well, how do you think that cheesy instrument gets such good quality, clinically applicable images? And it's actually the software that was used, the software code that was used to fix the Hubble Space Telescope until we could get up there and do the repair. And it's still in place. It's about to be replaced soon. But that's real. And so that's how in the background it is everywhere, that practically no one realizes that it's there. The kinds of opportunities that you get for RD&T, that's research, development, and technologies, usually involve, as far as the space program, about 3 broad areas. All right, we're looking at microgravity, which is something that living systems on this planet have never had to deal with and experience because phylogenetically, evolutionarily, we've never had to put up with it. and we're doing it now. We're introducing it now into the panoply of stimuli that we subject terrestrial life to be. And it could be ourselves, it could be your favorite plants, it could be your pets or whatever, but none of them ever had to deal with it. So it's that unique. The radiation environment is obviously high LET, high linear energy transfer radiation, to which we're not exposed on any great extent on this planet also. Sporadically we have some issues with it, but nothing that seems to be highly impactful of the population. However, there is a growth. The last count I had, I think there are 15 now proton facilities in this country for the treatment of cancer. And from that we're learning, and they're learning. They're learning from space about radiation in that energy level, and we're learning what the biological effects and playouts are in people that are exposed to those kinds of radiation. So those are important places that we can actually make real contributions. And the other thing is in remote environments. We're continually dealing in very arduous situations, remote environments that provide numerous challenges simultaneously to humans. And I think that you'll see in some examples here today how that we've been helpful in being able to provide good information to people experiencing a remote environment problem here on the planet. The kind of technology developments that we get, this is just broad spectrum now, telemetry, which, by the way, from my understanding, didn't exist in the hospitals to any great extent until after the Apollo program. And so, you know, telemetry is incredibly important for a whole wide aspect of medical procedures. Non-invasive sensing. We don't like sticking needles and things in people in space, and we like to be able to do things non-invasively. So it drives us to either develop or seek technologies that actually can do that for us. A lot of clinical testing instrumentation that we can provide because of the fact that we need to be able to monitor the health and activities of individuals while they're conducting work in these very remote places. I already mentioned about imaging and image analysis, so I won't get into that. But drug delivery technologies, drug stabilization technologies and things coming from the space program. A lot of this has to do with the ability, the way fluids that are non-miscible fluids actually associate in space and allow us to make microcapsules with very, very unique properties that we can use in drug delivery and even in stabilization. There are new drugs and vaccines that are coming out of this. As we put cells into space and begin to study the cell biology of space, we find out that they make or they synthesize things in more copious amounts or novel materials that we've not seen before that may be useful to us as biopharmaceuticals, may be useful to us as vaccines. And the most recent, I think most everybody's heard about this, that there are certain bacteria that substantially increase their virulence in space and given us new insight to virulence mechanisms and opportunities for vaccines that we were not able to develop before. So I think those are exciting areas. I already talked about managing remote environments. So I think you can see that there's a lot of opportunity for us here. And it's not to toot our horn and say we're going to cure mankind. Okay? That's actually NIH's job. But we certainly can provide technologies and new insights for them that give them the opportunity to bring forward some areas that have had long-standing challenges to them. And so we look forward to our continued participation in this through the National Lab, the International Space Station, where NIH and others, industries, are looking to participate. My personal experience in this and why I'm so passionate about it, and if I didn't sound like it, I just didn't eat breakfast, okay, because I usually can't eat breakfast if I'm going to talk. But I actually, as was said, I was involved in getting the bioreactor that was actually the inventor who was here yesterday. Did anybody know that? He was sitting up here on several panels. David Wolf. He's one of the three inventors. He and Tin Trin and Ray Schwartz. And you got the story on that already, about how that was developed in the skunk works. Sam Poole told you about it. But this device is very, very interesting. It provides a property for cells that we don't have anywhere else in cell biology. It allows cells to actually, of their own attractive forces to come back together and remorph themselves as the tissue they came from. So if these are liver cells, a lot of times what we will see is full differentiation and development, and it begins to look like liver morphologically. So, and it has some functions of liver. So it's very exciting. That's not only liver, they've done 37 tissues. That's one area. And disease models. We've been able to make models of cancer now using that same kind of technology that enable us to study the relationship between normal and neoplastic cells. You know, the tumor doesn't grow in its own environment. It's growing in the environment of normal cells, and there's a relationship there. And understanding that relationship can change the way we look at chemotherapy and radiation therapy. So it's a great opportunity again. I talked about biopharmaceuticals, and you know, we're still a space program. It's used in space cell biology also. It was built by NASA. The intellectual property on this is about 30 patents. There have, over the years, 19 licenses been written against it, and for 2 years we were the #1 revenue stream for royalty in all of NASA's inventions. So it's not trivial, and by virtue of that, it has won a number of awards and great recognition for the inventors. I have to say one last thing in regards to this, and that is we had the great opportunity to actually do our flagship work with this on Mir. And Mir was a fantastic environment for us to be able to do this. And in that setting, we have probably a record I vouchsafe will be standing 100 years from now, the longest continuous cell culture in space. It was done on Mir, and it was 137 days long, and it was bovine cartilage. So if you're a cow with a bad knee, we may have some promise for you. But the reality is that we learned so much from that, and it's actually a paper in Proceedings National Academy of Sciences. So these are great opportunities that we have to actually really influence the community and make a difference and get them to understand that there are a lot of good things that come from the space program. And if you look at our 0.6% of the budget and you look at the playout, just subtracting out all the glitz and all the glory of exploration, and I am not an anti-exploration guy at all, but look at what we've gotten. The book, if we write the book on those playouts, has probably got at least 500 pages in it of all the things that have come to mankind by virtue of having a space program. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started with the panel. And I stuck to my 10 minutes, like I said. The first speaker today is Dr. Dulchovsky, and I'm going to just let him do the intro of himself, tell him what he does and why he's here, and what he thinks is good technology or good science that we're bringing to the country.
Thanks, Neil. I certainly can't compete with cow knee replacements in that. I'm going to focus today on global health. And I think that this is yet another way to engage the public, motivate them, and show some of the value that our space program brings back to us as humans on this planet. And although I am up here on the stage, I need to acknowledge all of the team members that have allowed us to go forward with this. Firstly, our wonderful astronaut and cosmonaut co-investigators on many things we've done on station and in ground studies. My co-investigators at Wiley Laboratories, many of which are here, and also our partners in Russia and at the IBMP. Now, what I will say this morning are my views. Most people, when I start talking, want some plausible deniability, and so I will allow that. I wonder if you have ever thought of the International Space Station in a tiny rural village in Africa or South America or other remote areas as similar. They seem completely opposite, but let me try and give you a little bit of a story as to how these are exact analog environments. So let's think a little bit about that tiny village. They have a very remote area. It's difficult to communicate with them. It's often episodic. They have very limited resources. They have horrible training. They can't keep people in that location. And now think up to our International Space Station. Many of those exact same constraints occur there. We have challenges with time, distance, money, resources, communications, and that. We're sitting in one of the best medical communities on our planet right now, and I within stone's throw of here, there's probably 28 CT scans, 100 MRIs, and all of that. 99% of the population of the planet is not within 6 hours range of those resources. So I think we have to think globally beyond the space program. And then finally, think about evolution. We've talked about DNA over the last couple of years, but the fastest evolution occurs with some environmental pressure and in a moderately chaotic environment. And that, again, is our International Space Station and our space program. I've had the pleasure of working with NASA and the NSBRI for now over 15 years in that, and I liken this to something like the Apollo 13 scenario, where we have a number of problems, we have time constraints, and we have to fix that. My little piece of the pie relates to providing medical care on Shuttle and International Space Station, ultimately exploration. Very often not done by doctors, very limited environment in terms of resources, tight training constraints. We used ultrasound because, frankly, it was the only diagnostic imagery we had on orbit. But if you think back when we first started this, ultrasound was used to tell you the sex of your unborn child and maybe whether you had gallstones and a few other things. So the first things that we started looking at was, okay, let's be MacGyver-like. What else can we use this tool for? And so through very large studies, we found, boy, it's pretty good for a number of things that we would not normally use this for. And I note Victor Snyder in the front row, who tortured me to go beyond what I had initially planned on in terms of those indications. And that we had novel approaches to this. Routinely, it's 500 hours of training to get proficiency in how to work with this complex device. I had 2 hours with the astronaut crews. So we had to think about how do you educate people to do this in such a rapid way. So we came up with multimedia, just-in-time training algorithms that, importantly, are now used across the planet. The American College of Surgeons is charged with training every surgeon in the planet now how to do ultrasound. They now use our methodologies on doing this, as do medical schools, emergency medicine, and others. Let's go back now to global health. So when we were doing this, we wanted this to be fun for our astronaut crews. So we first approached a professional sports team. I'm from Detroit. We used our hockey team, the Detroit Red Wings. And as we were using them to jazz this up, our educational program, they saw the benefit of this and said, wow, that seems like a pretty neat technology. Could we bring this to the sports arenas? We don't have a CAT scan, an MRI, or even an X-ray. We get hurt a lot. And so now numerous sports teams utilize this technology. Well, apparently by the way, non-doctors performing it. Then the Olympics heard about this, and so now we have participated in the last 3 Olympics. We are now part of the training algorithm for the United States Olympic Committee. We were substantively involved in a number of athletes, such as Lindsey Vonn and others, that used our techniques and were ultimately able to medal relative to that. Let's get a little bit more remote on that. At the end of the panel here, Christian Otto and I worked with these technologies on perhaps the remotest location on our planet, on Mount Everest, as the way to diagnose injuries that might occur in a hypobaric environment at Advanced Base Camp on Mount Everest. We then went to the United Nations and said, we think we're onto something here, because this is a scalable, affordable, and sustainable technology. Portable ultrasound devices are now virtually the size of a cell phone, in that they are considerably cheaper than the $250,000 units we used to utilize for this. And so now we've partnered with the United Nations to take this technology, these training methods that we had developed for our astronaut crews, and take these to the remotest villages, the ends of the line, if you will, to diagnose maternal health abnormalities, the beginnings of AIDS, tuberculosis, infectious disease, trauma, and things such as this. So now we are a critical component of the World Health Organization and the United Nations. So I'll close with challenging all of us that I think our primary mission here is, of course, to support the space program and the brave men and women who go above and beyond our orbit. But I think we need to think back on humankind as a whole, because I think the NASA credo is exactly the same as the United Nations. So let's be thinking about sustainability, affordability, scalability, and things like that for all of the wonderful things that we in the audience are developing for this unique constrained environment, and that unique constrained environment occurs on our planet as well. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, Dr. Chauncey. David?
I'm David Dinges. I'm a team lead for the neurobehavioral psychosocial team of the NSBRI and a funded NASA investigator. So my pitch would be that the neurobehavioral and psychosocial area, the human performance area, has that NASA funds either directly or through NSBRI, has a terrific opportunity to fix a problem that vexes all industrialized countries at a major level. And I'm talking about human error. Human error accounts for 50 to 98% of everything that goes wrong on the planet, despite the public's perception that that's not the case. And it's 98% if you include human error in design of systems. It's 50% if you ignore that and just count what went wrong. And whether we're talking about oil wells at sea, or super tankers, or nuclear power plants, or hazardous materials being moved, or healthcare medical errors, or commercial aviation, etc., human error is the problem. And the level of concern has escalated on Earth because we're now globally running 24/7. And these archaic 100-year-old work rules that governments use for how long you can work and whether a human will be rested and won't make a mistake are so out of touch with science and reality that all governments now, at least in the West, and virtually all industries want to get rid of them. So what's the alternative? The very thing NASA's funding, which is detection of human error, smart machines, machines that watch humans while humans work with machines. The whole idea of machine vision, of brief probes of humans, of environmental conditions like lighting and sound and that could keep a human alert or know when a human's going to make a mistake. That's the future, and NASA has an opportunity to lead, and lead aggressively in this area. It has high credibility, particularly in technology development in this area. So and I know this because I am the daily hounded by the National Academy of Sciences, the National Research Council, the Institute of Medicine, the United States Justice Department. One industry after another is struggling to come to grips with how do we keep it going. There are 7 billion of us on the planet. If I showed you a video of every airplane in the world flying at one time, commercial aircraft, you'd gasp in disbelief. We have hundreds of millions of people working night shift work. We're not biologically equipped for that. Now, space station's very similar. We've got to operate around the clock. We're outside of the entrainment capacity of the oscillator up there. We don't have sunrise and sunset every 24 hours. So the work that Bud Brainerd and others are doing on light entrainment, learning how to synchronize the system or maintain the optimal phase at which performance can be emitted, the work we're doing on recovery and recycle rate in humans. Do you know that there are no studies to answer the question virtually all governments want to know? How hard can I work people? How much time do I need to recover them? And how fast can I recycle them back into a system that never stops? NASA can lead in this area. The space program internationally can lead in this area. In fact, this is science. Pardon me, it's not brain science in the sense that it's not brain surgery, but it is science that good scientists in many of your countries can do and participate in and help move ahead. So I think we have a terrific opportunity there. I would just end by saying that what this means is we also have to look at biological vulnerability. We know that a large portion of the rate at which people will deteriorate in any system under stress, high workload, sleep loss, appears to be trait-like, phenotypic, biological. Now, we're looking for markers of this, not for selection, because you may select somebody who's vulnerable in one area but very resistant to radiation or bone loss or something. But you do it to target countermeasure utilization, to create preventative strategies for people so you can optimize human capability. So I think the optimization of human capability by the minimization of error, the detection of it, with the kinds of technologies NASA's currently funding, could be a major, major contributor to a worldwide problem. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Carl?
I'm going to talk a little bit about the 1% that isn't human error.
50. Go ahead and take 50 of it.
Natural disasters. There are about 450 natural disasters reported each year. That's the average in 2010. It caused about $100 billion worth of damage each year. About 50,000 people are killed each year through natural disasters, and 250 million are affected by them. To put that into scale, that's the equivalent of wiping out all of the world government's space activity every year. That's a lot. Now, what can space do about it? It seems to be particularly well suited, as it gives this bird's eye view of Earth and is unaffected by many of the natural disasters. Well, if you look at what the main sources of these natural disasters are: windstorm, flood, wave surge, earthquake, and drought. Three of those, the windstorm, the drought, and the flood, are due to climate events, maybe climate change. So space is a tool for helping us understand that a little bit better. The other tool that space provides is being able to look at and to measure and to communicate from areas which are very difficult to access. And this means that it's a very useful thing during the event itself, because the communications and knowing what has happened is very difficult to achieve. However, the big problem with implementation, and all agencies are really interested in disaster management, is how do you go from the information which we can provide from our satellites to the operations manager who is dealing with a crisis and doesn't have time to learn about the space facilities that are applicable in his particular event. And until such time as the space community bridges that gap between the technical smarts and capabilities and the person managing it on the ground in real time, we're not going to make a large amount of progress. Now, there's another thing about disasters that's interesting, and that is there a predictive capability, or is there something you can do in terms of advanced planning to alleviate the effects? Predictive capability, there is a capability coming along now where we can measure plate movements, which would begin to help us understand the most likely areas for earthquake activity and maybe the timing of them. That would be a huge help. Another one is floodplains. In Canada, we've had a lot of floods in the last week or two, and one of the things that was able to be done because of space is that in Manitoba, the rivers were too high, large flood areas, because there had been very good elevation maps and basins. They broke a dike and thereby relieved a lot of pressure on areas that would have been badly affected by it. Another Canadian couple happened to be traveling to Las Vegas in a van, and their GPS put them into Nevada. The woman was found 7 weeks later, still alive. The man wasn't. GPS seems to have got them into that trouble. But if they had had a GPS with an emergency locator capability, which is available to everybody for $100 and $100 a year, they would have been found within days. So there are many things in space that can be helped, that can help disaster mitigation from the large-scale level to the small-scale level. However, we still have a lot of work to do to bridge the gap between our tools and the users. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Krister?
Thank you. Well, space research benefits for life on Earth. That's a very large field, and space research, I think you can interpret it in several ways. One is space about research, not only space done in research in space. And actually start with space research about space, which a lot of it is done in space as well. I think you can say that that has also been to big benefit for humanity. I think it's been very satisfying for everybody to learn more our place in the universe. And some examples is Hubble, which maybe have taught us more than most of other spacecraft studying universe. Among other things, the data from Hubble, by that we now know fairly well the age of the universe, 13.7 billion years, I guess, it's the current best number. And it may be not a tangible benefit, but it certainly is something which is very interesting to know. I think that research from space has taught us more about Earth than probably all the things we have been doing on Earth. Also, among other things, understanding again our place in universe by the first pictures of Apollo of the little blue ball far away, which is Earth, and the only place so far we humans can live in. And the fragility of the atmosphere, for example. Every astronaut will tell you how fragile the atmosphere looks like when you're from Earth. And all the satellites, Earth observation satellites, are studying the Earth and environment, has told us more about the environment, the conditions which we can live on Earth. And was a very good speech here about all the disaster management, which is coming directly close to that. And also through Earth observation satellites, for example, we can predict when maybe bad harvest somewhere. We can be prepared for these things, and which goes into the global health point here. Of course, maybe what we are more thinking about here today is what is the research we do in space on ISS and things like that, where we do not so much look down on Earth or look up in space and utilizes those advantages being in space, but more utilizing the microgravity conditions. And what do we learn from that, which is of benefit for life? And it's true that there's not very many things we can pinpoint directly. We did that, and therefore we have this, which is a big thing, which you can tell everybody. Although when you give interviews and things like that, you very often get that question. Tell me one thing which you've done there on ISS which really have helped us. And but I like to look upon it the way, most research done in laboratories all around the world, they don't produce Nobel Prize results every week or every decade even, or ever. But still it's very valuable research. And it's all these pieces together which produces an increase in knowledge which we can then increase our quality of life on Earth. On microgravity, of course, the typical fields are fluid science, material science, combustion, biology, heard about the bioreactor in the beginning here, and medicine, of course, how the body works. We study it in a new environment, microgravity, and we learn new things about our bodies, which eventually help us also to maybe find new clinical ways to treat patients on Earth. Nevertheless, I want to tell you one example which very interesting example in ESA, where by a crucial experiment in space, actually not on ISS, it was a sounding rocket, but it was planned for ISS, but due to the delay of Columbus after Columbia accident, it was rescheduled and could be done on a sounding rocket. It was to produce new materials. Actually, one of the points here, one was a lightweight material, titan aluminum alloy, and understand how one could create large structures of this new this alloy, and particularly target to make lightweight turbines for aircrafts. And there was a big consortium put together with industry and academia together, led by ESA, but also funded by European Commission money. And they produced this in a 5-year product, a year, and a crucial experiment to understand the details of the solidification of this alloy. That was kind of come from a space experiment. And also they looked into nickel aluminum, which turns out to be a very efficient catalyst. It's as good as platinum as a catalyst in fuel cells, but it's order of magnitude cheaper. And when we move into a new communication strategy where we use fuel cells, which is running on hydrogen in cars, this can be a very important product to have. So I just wanted to end with this. Start with the big universe, understanding our position, to some actually concrete example. And I think this whole span shows all which we can do in space, research in space for our benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. David?
Hi, I'm David Hilmers, and I serve on the NSBR user panel. I had the great privilege of being a part of the astronaut program, and I think that part of my experiences in space really drove me and motivated me to not only become a doctor, which I went to medical school after leaving the program, but also in being a part of global health. I'm really basically a primary care physician now. I do about half of my work in inpatient and half is outpatient, but my real love still remains doing global health, and every time I have the opportunity to pack my bags, I do go out and do disaster relief and medical mission work. And I'd like on that to kind of take the micro view, as it may be, talking about how space has affected us as doctors who are working on the front line, seeing patients every day, and maybe going out when we can and doing our small part in the global health arena. I'd also like to say the great debt of gratitude that we have for researchers like Scott, that I think with their pioneering work in ultrasound, for example, are making changes that are going to completely change the way that we do medicine right now. Just a couple of, I'd just like to give a couple of examples of how space technology has been used in, personally, in projects that I've had a privilege to be a part of. I think the first one, after I finished my residency, I worked with the Baylor Pediatric AIDS group in Southern Africa, and one of my projects was to develop a telemedicine system for some of the clinics that they were developing in Botswana. And so I used some of the technology that NASA had first pioneered back in the 60s and 70s, working with telemedicine. And as a result, there are now quite a few of these clinics treating pediatric AIDS patients throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And in each of those clinics, there's a link with back to the United States and medical centers such as here in Houston, where slides, radiographic studies, slides can be sent to experts here as a result of the technology that NASA developed decades earlier. I found in global health that, based on work that Scott and others had done, that the use of ultrasound, I wouldn't go anywhere on this planet without taking my ultrasound with me on a global health trip. I was one of the early responders to the disaster in Haiti. The hospital that I worked in for several weeks had most of its equipment destroyed. We brought an ultrasound with us, portable ultrasound, and basically it was the only radiographic study that we had to use to treat broken bones, horrible trauma. And I don't know how many lives were saved as a result of having ultrasound with us. Here in our practice now, I'm working on a project along with Jeff Sutton and NSBRI of trying to introduce ultrasound in primary care visits. And I think that this, we talk about the cost of healthcare in the United States and how we're going broke with our current system and how to save money. And I think that this is one of the areas that we can realize an incredible savings, where we can, a patient comes and we can, instead of sending them for an expensive test, sending them to the emergency room, we can pull out our ultrasound and we can determine whether this nodule that they feel in their thyroid is large enough to be biopsied. If the patient with a swelling in their leg needs to be sent to the emergency room to have a blood clot diagnosed or not, we can do that in the clinic, and we can save that patient a lot of time, a lot of waiting in emergency rooms. We can offload the emergency room from having to take these patients, and the potential savings to the United States is incredible. So I think that a number of the innovations that were started by NASA, we're seeing the fruit now at the, not only in the macro level, but down there in the trenches where I work. I'm seeing it, and I think it has incredible implications for the way that we do medicine in the future.
Thank you, David. Inessa?
Yeah. I would like to address the matter in a way it is formulated here, countermeasures to different changes in our body, but I will talk not about this, but about some aspect which is not listed here, about the meaning, about the importance of space for developing of basic sciences. I think I do believe in primat, as we say, in primary role of the basic sciences in everything was going after that, application, development of technology, and so on and so on. And space brought to our knowledges and to our study the new area of human physiology. It is gravitational physiology. It doesn't mean that some of gravitational mechanisms were not known to physiology before. But there was no theory really about the gravitational physiology which studies the mechanism which were brought to the living body by gravity, which it appears in life of living systems. Actually, it was following by developing in living organism a lot of different mechanisms in different parts of the body, and all these mechanisms stay gravity dependent. It means that when gravity is out or declined, the followance of it is disturbances of work in this mechanism, which already deeply inbuilt in all function of the human body. And actually, understanding of this mechanism in different part of the body, in different system, allow us to find the way of diagnostic these disturbances of the mechanism, to find a way of counteract the developing of the disturbances, not just by pushing here or there and by chance finding, but finding based on our understanding. And I think for me, maybe as a scientist, but for me it is the biggest challenge and the biggest input from space into on-ground on-ground life. Why I'm saying so? Because gravity disturbances are not just the primate of space flights, not at all. Take a look, hypokinesia. It is just now the regular part of our life. All of us are hypokinetic. And therefore, those mechanisms which were developed to keep active such mechanisms as posture, as postural support of every of our movement, as support, autonomic support for all our gravity-dependent movement and so on, all these mechanisms in the hypokinesia don't work properly. Now, this hypokinesia become even more dangerous when we have deal with people, with aging people on one side, and with people who are assigned to bed after stroke, after trauma, after diseases, and so on and so on. There are million applications which I could bring as an example on the table, but I will give you just one example, and that will be it. For 30 years, not very long time, but still enough time, for 30 years of very hard, intensive work on gravitational factor effects in sensory motor system. We have found out what the mechanisms which are bringing harm. Let me put it this way: I'm not English-speaking person. So I have some difficulties in finding proper word. But so we found the role. We found the mechanism how the loading affect the different system of the body, and loading and what sensors are involved, and so on and so on. And this finding helped us to develop new countermeasure. So I still talk about countermeasure. You can put this, yeah. So it allowed us to develop some new countermeasure for space flight, and I will not talk about them now. And very successfully now, we are working on it. But what is much more, we suggested our knowledges and those things which were developed for our countermeasure for up there, we suggested to clinic. The first we started with cerebral palsy clinic. We are very famous now in Russia because the just application of loading with those devices which were developed for space now become the main, I would say, treatment. The main, how to say, device to teach these cerebral palsy people to walk, to stand, and so on. And it is now used in 73 centers of Russia. And these centers get these devices funded by our Ministry of Health. And then we got the support that we were right in our hypothesis. We suggested the same to try for clinic after stroke patient and after trauma patient. And now I'm very proud to say that we have got actually we have such a premium award for the new area or new direction in medicine, and this was called the space technologies in neurorehabilitation. That is just an example, and I'm finishing, but what I'm saying, that actually everything what we developed for our cosmonaut up there as countermeasure, as a support, and so on, almost everything, which is actually directed to keep working our gravitational mechanism up there, it is applicable to the Earth very broadly, and we just have to think about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I had not heard the cerebral palsy story before. Okay, yeah, Christian?
Thanks, Neil. Good morning, everyone. For my 5 minutes, I'd like to discuss two of the topics from our list: mitigating adverse effects of space, a hostile environment, and research to enhance life on Earth. Despite what's listed in the program, I have the pleasure of working for NASA JSC, currently as the project scientist for the visual impairment intracranial pressure problem. And the NASA Human Research Program has added this risk to its portfolio and established the Visual Impairment Intracranial Pressure Project within the Human Health and Countermeasures element. You heard yesterday mention of this problem, and for those of you who attended asthma recently, it was formally discussed that professional venue, and there's also a paper describing the first 6 cases coming out in the Journal of Ophthalmology. So to date, there have been 8 long-duration male astronauts ranging in age from 45 to 55 years of age, each having spent 6 months aboard the station, and they've experienced in-flight visual changes. The affected astronauts represent 23.5% of the 34 U.S. crew members who've flown on the space station exhibited these pre- to post-flight refractive changes. Some cases they are transient, and in other cases they're persistent. Decreased intraocular pressure was found post-flight in 3 cases. Fundoscopic examination revealed post-flight findings of choroidal folds in 4, optic disc edema in 5 cases, and the presence of cotton wool spots in 3 cases, and you heard mention of that yesterday. Findings from MRI exam showed posterior globe flattening and optic nerve sheath distension, and those are frequently signs of raised intracranial pressure. And in fact, opening CSF pressure was elevated in 4 of those cases post-flight, confirming elevated intracranial pressure. Now, hypotheses speculate venous insufficiency or elevated pressure in the brain caused by cephalad fluid shifts during spaceflight are possible mechanisms for these ocular changes. Now, we also have to consider local effects of at the level of the eye. Excuse me, I seem to have caught this cold that's going around Houston. Given that all astronauts are exposed to microgravity and the cephalad fluid shift, elevated ambient carbon dioxide levels, alternative resistive exercise devices, high sodium, which you've heard about, and other possible causative agents, and given that they're both symptomatic and asymptomatic, patients have exhibited these optic nerve sheath edema post-flight MRI, there's a high probability that all astronauts are at risk for increased intracranial pressure. And those that are susceptible either by eye architecture, anatomy, narrow discs, or physiology may have a high likelihood of developing the sequelae mentioned, and which will determine the long-term or permanent vision loss or impairment. So clearly elevated intracranial pressure and vision disturbance in spaceflight are serious health risks to the astronaut population. And as you know, there's a lot of discussion about longer missions that are being planned, and clearly subjects will be exposed to greater periods of microgravity and hence prolonged exposure to these conditions. As many of you know, on February 8th to 10th this year, we held a VIP summit. That's what we refer to the problem. But we had a summit with national and international experts in ophthalmology, neuro-ophthalmology, neurosurgery, neurophysiology, and cardiology to help define the scope of the problem. The agency is now implementing an aggressive research program, and this includes new imaging techniques and protocols to assess on-orbit ocular changes and indirect measures of intracranial pressure using ultrasound. And this work is being pioneered by at NASA by the Advanced Projects Group, and many of those members are here, Dr. Hamilton, Sargisian, and also Dr. Ebert and other collaborators. We'll also need new methods of measuring ICP and compliance measurement, and this is being looked at in terms of using MRI, novel techniques. This is being investigated. On the hardware development side, there's a plan and work to obtain a miniaturized form of optical coherence tomography, which is an extremely sensitive measure of the neurofibril layer changes in the eye for in-flight use. And other technology being investigated to find a non-invasive method of measuring ICP in flight. Identification of serum CSF biomarkers reflecting elevated ICP and any degree of damage to the brain are clearly of interest. Countermeasure development, perhaps beginning with devices such as LBNP, or the lower body negative pressure, the bracelet device, as well as methodologies such as aerobic exercise, which draws blood volume down into the lower limbs, will be investigated to determine if either one or possibly a combination might mitigate the effects of cephalad fluid shift. So the VIP problem actually has significant overlap with many terrestrial clinical problems, and this is the potential to better understanding of treatment and monitoring of idiopathic intracranial hypertension, glaucoma, head trauma, hydrocephalus, hypertensive encephalopathy, and blast-related TBI, just to name a few. Currently, NASA MedOps is engaged in an active program of monitoring crew members in flight by conducting real-time guided ocular ultrasound exams, real-time guided ophthalmology or using the panoptic ophthalmoscope exams from mission control. And this is an example of real-time cutting-edge telemedicine. It's being done routinely early in flight at L+30, late in flight at R-30, and at L+100 at the flight surgeon's discretion. We'd like to expand this to near monthly monitoring, and we'd also like to include our Russian colleagues and our other international partners in this effort and efforts to come. Now, I mentioned cutting-edge telemedicine. I'd like to finish with a concrete example of technology, or rather methodology transfer, that is closer to home than you might think. There's a lot of expertise in telemedicine at NASA, and since last fall, a number of us have been working with MD Anderson Cancer Center, which is just a few blocks away from here, at their request to assist them in establishing a clinical program of tele-oncology care. Now, there's significant shortage of oncology specialists here in the state of Texas. In fact, most counties, the majority of counties, have no access to oncology care. The project is working to establish satellite locations in outlying communities where oncology care from MD Anderson may be projected via telemedicine so that oncology patients may be assessed. Tumor boards may be conducted. Pre-op radiation and chemotherapy can be monitored remotely. Pre-op assessments conducted, and also post-op monitoring. This is the benefit of improving access to advanced oncology care in these underserviced counties, increasing the oncology expertise in outlying communities, and providing access to novel clinical trials that typically aren't available or only available at large tertiary centers, and also allowing patients to remain closer to their home communities for a much larger portion of their oncology care, which is in contrast to traveling frequently and staying in a hotel away from their loved ones and support network for weeks on end. So as a primary care physician and a space researcher, I find these types of projects allow us to combine these two worlds and do good, and this magnifies the intrinsic reward and underscores the charge to our panel, which is space research benefits for life on Earth, humanity. So with that, I'll end. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian, for that comprehensive description there. I think we'll go to Victor Snyder. And Victor Snyder, right there. There's an empty chair there. You just switch out on those chairs. He's here on behalf of Rich Williams today. I'd like to remind you while we're getting set up here, we have a 10:45 hard cutoff, and we need time for discussion. So I'm going to ask you to...
I think I can be finished by then.
I can't tell you how happy I am, so I won't.
I wanted to talk about some general things in terms of the research benefits that we have done in space or use space technology, and have ported that over to people here on Earth. I have to keep reminding my colleagues sometimes that we take care of approximately 100 active astronauts at any one time, but all the things that we do for them, we're really doing it for the taxpayers of the people who are paying for the space program, and that most of the things that we actually do and innovate for the astronauts have direct benefits for the individuals in our communities. I would like to basically start off by highlighting one of those areas that I think is very important, and that is that many of our children, in terms of education, are learning through NASA research. There are NASA research programs that are put out through the web or through other places in which individuals are able to do or participate in some way. I believe that this is fueling their imagination of what can be done with study and work, and I think that that's very important. The NASA innovations have been turned over to the general community in 3 areas. One is obviously the spin-offs from engineering, actually. The second is the actual research that we do in the biomedical community. And obviously the third is the R&D&T for new and important breakthrough technologies. And we've seen some of those in the space program as well. The International Space Station, as you know, is the size of a 5-bedroom house. It has 2 bathrooms, a gym, and we take up 6,000 pounds of supplies per expedition for the crew and for the safety of the space station itself. Well, what this means is that there's a closed loop life support system that's very important for the protection of the astronauts, and all the information that we have done to be able to protect the station, not only from the International Space Station, but what we've learned from our Russian colleagues on the Mir Space Station and the Soyuz and the Skylab before that. These things are used routinely in the down here on Earth, and whether it's how to make sure that we don't have sick buildings, to monitoring for bacterial pathogens, and how we do that quickly and real time if necessary, and especially with the new problems we've had with terrorism, in which several of the techniques that NASA had already been using for monitoring contamination was able to be ported right off into the security aspect of what's going on. Actually, the Air Force has just contacted and is working with NASA in terms of oxygen generation. They have grounded their F-22 fleet because of contamination of chemicals to the pilots, as well as the oxygen device not working very well. And so where do they come for help for like that is us. Since 1976, there's been over 1,600 documented NASA technologies that benefited industries. I have a list of them. I'm not going to highlight, but perhaps 2. One is called the Airside titanium oxide. It's an air purifier that kills 93.3% of airborne pathogens. This came from monitoring and clearing ethylene in the plant chambers that we were able to start using on the Mir station and obviously on ISS with our Russian colleagues. I think this was very important. In medicine itself, I only want to highlight things that perhaps haven't been highlighted, and one is medical practice guidelines. These have been specifically developed for those who cannot reach the major health treatment centers. I think that perhaps Rick is going to talk about the Chilean miners, and this is based on these guidelines. Another important aspect has been shelf life of medications, supplies, and things like that. And NASA has been able to be at the forefront of this, whether it's merely changing packaging to new technologies and having those out in advance, or to study how long medications really are available for people. And I think that these are all very, very important. Needless to say, a lot of the things that have been mentioned as well, but the other part of global surveillance has been the use of our satellites and all to look at changes in climate and how it directly affects medicine and problems with that. And this is usually, we're currently doing this with malaria and with making sure the production of food is adequate because of the animals that come and take this. And I think that this is expanding rather than decreasing. And in fact, there is a meeting in India in 2 weeks in which they will be discussing the medical aspects and what you can learn from global surveillance like this. And then finally, what I'd like to do is talk about one countermeasure, which I know most about since I was able to do that in an old day, and that's bone loss. Analog studies showed that osteoporosis occurs. It occurs in space. NASA's studies showed the time course of that bone loss, the forces that the bone need, how much exercise, and how to prevent it and to treat it. They developed the measurements for bone densitometry to figure out how to do it. They did evaluation of real-world therapies. Recently, we have been at the forefront in terms of making sure people have the right amount of vitamin D intake, and obviously the ultrasound for bone fractures. All these things are now being done here on Earth for the benefit of humanity, and it's all because of the minor investments that NASA actually made in this area. I'd like to point out just quickly as an ending that NIH spends about $100 million a year on bone health. The Department of Defense spends about $20 million a year on bone health, and NASA spends $1 to $2 million a year on bone health. But all those things that I've mentioned in terms of what has been done by NASA and is now in the general community could not have been done or was not being done by NIH or the Department of Defense. It really took a NASA to help direct this direction of what's necessary and needed. Thank you.
Okay, the 5 minutes, yeah. And so good morning, I'm Chiaki Mukai from JAXA, and what I would like to point out today is just a kind of general idea of the fantastic uniqueness of the space medicine, and I have to well organize. The uniqueness of the space medicine to apply it to the idea of space for humanity. So, first of all, what I can think of the uniqueness or fantastic uniqueness of space medicine or space physiology is. The first one is, I have three I can think of right now, is the symptoms happening in space look pretty much augmented compared to the one happening on the Earth. Like, for example, bone loss 10 times, bone loss in space for 6 months, 10 times more than the osteoporosis women, and also the muscle atrophy 3 times more in space compared to the bed rest study. So, the countermeasures in space which can counteract this augmented situation should work on Earth. So that also is fascinating me to do some the space medicine and also the space physiology. And also the second uniqueness is since the space, I think, has much less buffer system to absorb or dilute the problems. The problems related to physiology or problems related to psychology can be more visible, caused by unique environment which is given by space, like microgravity, radiation, and also the confined environment. Because on Earth, if somebody has some problem psychologically, we can always leave the place and then find out the place to reveal ourselves. But in space, I think it's anyhow the absorption system or buffer system to hold those human activities or human physiological response is much less, so that the problems can be clearly seen. So we will be able to utilize that uniqueness to detect some of the possible problems which we cannot clearly see on Earth. So that is the second uniqueness of the space environment and space environment. And the third one is we will be able to we can see the kind of entire kind of clinical course of disease or disease-like situation using the astronaut as a subject in a very short time, short frame. And especially the onset, like I used to work as a medical doctor to see the patients, and usually the patient just come to see the doctor when the symptom has developed. So usually we lose. We cannot take a look at the onset of the course. And then, but in space, we can, since astronaut, cosmonaut are healthy people, and when they go to space, they develop the disease-like situation or strong, very strong responses to the strange environment. So we can see the onset on those the adaptation phase and the recovery phase. That's, to me, the beauty of utilizing the astronaut as the subject. So this uniqueness should, to me, of the space medicine can be advertised more. So with this in my mind, to apply the space medicine to the idea of space for humanity, first of all, the space medicine right now sounds like very limited, because many people think the space medicine is only for the people who are going to explore the space. So we have to launch a clear concept of space medicine is also for people on Earth. So I think when you write a textbook, you have to maybe write it down like a space medicine is a preventive medicine, and then it also helps for people exploring space or living in a remote area, and at the same time the people on Earth. And then actually, thanks to the accumulation of these 50 years of human space flight, the knowledge, the space medicine itself can be applied directly to the people on Earth. Like Big Snyder mentioned, the Chilean the rescue was one of the great example. So again, I really would like to emphasize that space medicine is for people on Earth. And then in conclusion, to me, my point is that the Earth itself is a part of space. If we think about this entire universe, so there's something so that if we explore space, which also means that we explore Earth, and if we develop something that can be used for the explorers for space, which is space medicine, which also advances the medicine on Earth. That's what I think.
Thank you, Chucky. Rick? Dr. Shearing?
Morning. I'm Rick Shearing again, not J.D. Polk. Jackie's talk was a good lead-in for what I'm going to talk about here, how space medicine experience knowledge can tie into a terrestrial problem. And in this case, it was the crisis of the Chilean miner rescue. J.D. had asked me to give this for him again. I wasn't there. like most of you, you were watching it on Fox News or something. And when I first started hearing about it, and at that time, I had no idea that JD, Mike Duncan, Al Holland, and Clint Craig were involved in it. And I thought, boy, folks who work at ISS could help those guys out. And sure enough, that's exactly what those guys were up to. So JD just wanted to briefly pass along his ideas about how NASA science research and ops experience was applicable to the ground, how they helped them. And the main message he wanted to say was, we were successful. And how did we do that? So there were three main areas that they applied our space knowledge in: engineering, medicine, and the BHP area. So I'll touch on those briefly. So you may remember you had 33 men trapped in a mine 2,400 feet below the surface. Their ages ranged from 19 to 62 years of age. They had a lot of medical conditions, unlike our space travelers who are relatively pretty healthy. They had type 2 diabetes, silicosis, hypertension, coronary disease, COPD. So they had quite a few problems, and obviously we're not directly applicable to what we deal with in space, but one of the things I noticed when I was watching that, and one of the things that JD and the team were asked to advise on when they got down there the end of August was, assessing the atmosphere, looking at the atmosphere, monitoring the atmosphere. And, when you work on console and in mission control, the first thing you do in the morning when you get your console up is you check the environment. What's the environment? What's the pressure? What's the O2? What's the CO2? Et cetera, et cetera. And you monitor that. And one of the things that I think has not been emphasized enough with our ISS operations is we're very good at 24/7, 365-day mission operation. That really cannot be emphasized enough. That is a huge benefit and knowledge of how to actually do a Mars mission. And certainly when they got down to the mine, that knowledge of how to run this mission, continuously, nonstop. This was new for the Chileans down there. When they got down there, JD, Mike, and the team were very comfortable getting in a situation where they actually had to help run this continuously nonstop and monitoring the environment and things. The first thing that they were faced with, they got access to the men at 17 days, and those men had been basically living on a teaspoon of tuna, a quarter of a peach, and a teaspoon of milk every other day for 17 days. Okay, if you do the math, maybe that's 100 to 200 kcals, maybe every other day. So by the time they got down there, they were definitely in starvation. And when this 4-inch Paloma, this pipe, was established, the Minister of Engineering and Health wanted to shove down as much food as they could get to them. That's where JD and the team stepped in, based off their knowledge of the Hubble mission that Dr. Hamilton, Doug Gillis, and their great team did with the Hubble rescue scenario, where if Hubble were damaged and would not be able to return, they had to fly Atlantis for a rescue, they would basically have to be sustained on a 1,000 kcal diet for, 45 days or something like that. So they had intimate knowledge of what would happen if you refed them too quickly, that you'd develop a refeeding syndrome and all the things that went along with that. So they stepped in really kind of at the nick of time to be able to help guide the Chileans back to where they should be so they don't develop a refeeding syndrome, which is lethal in many cases. That knowledge was gained from refeeding Japanese POWs after World War II, and they would start feeding them after months of starvation, and then we go into cardiac failure and die. So they helped with that, and that was, again, based off brilliant work done with Hubble. Probably the second issue that was that they had to face was the fact that the mine was 90 degrees, 90% humidity. And the men were sleeping on rocks. And starvation, along with dehydration, was becoming a huge issue. When they initially got a urine dipstick, 50% of these men had myoglobinuria. So they're frying a lot of muscle. Rhabdomyolysis, acute tubular necrosis were huge issues. So one of the things that they started working with right away was how do you get COTS down this 4-inch Paloma? Well, this gets back to the point that I was trying to drive yesterday, that the mission drives technology development. They put out, the President of Chile put out a news announcement that said we need to develop a cot that you can fit down a 4-inch Paloma, and we need it as soon as possible. In 4 days, someone developed a cot that they could send down there. The mission drove the technology development, and that was remarkable. Also, that the crisis drove competition. They put out a competition announcement for a team to develop a drill bit device that they could drill this 23-inch wide tunnel, and they had 3 teams that started real time start developing this technology to get this drill bit and then drive this tunnel down there. And again, the competition actually drove the ability to do that. They had some unique things in terms of their medical problems that we see in space. Again, vitamin D deficiency with bone loss. They had reactivation of Epstein-Barr and latent herpes virus, constipation, respiratory infections, skin irritations, dental caries, periodontal disease, all things that in some way, shape, or form we've had experience with in space. One issue that came up for Al with the BHP work was alcohol and tobacco, which it doesn't necessarily apply to what we do, but the issue really came down to how do you not have a mutiny when you refuse to give these miners something that they are used to engaging in pretty much on a daily basis. And so they had to balance, the concerns about, the COPD, lung disease and stuff with the fact that if they let these guys smoke, that it'll make things tolerable down there, and that's what they were able to do. So Al kind of compromised thinking about the bigger picture, what was very important. One of the things that Dave talked about was sleep cycle work, and one of the things that NASA, with Dave, Smith-Johnson, Lauren, and a lot of other folks on the BHP side developed is, probably the world's best knowledge on sleep cycles and how to monitor sleep cycles and keep people functional and performing. And they made sure that these miners were established on 3 shifts a day, that they had tasks, that they were exposed to artificial light, and they got them to a normal routine in a very austere, almost hostile environment as quickly as they could, and it worked. And fortunately, these men were able to carry that out as best they could. One thing that was kind of unique that we also have a lot of experience with is decompression risk. The mine itself, where they were at the bottom, was at sea level. The entrance was 2,400 feet above. So there was the theoretical risk that when they brought them to the top, they would actually have decompression sickness. So Johnny Conkin in the EPSP lab worked out some calculations and figured out that the risk was actually pretty low, that you wouldn't have to manage that threat, that they would actually have decompression sickness when they got back up to the top, which I thought was very interesting. On the rescue, one of the things that Clint Craig really provided a lot of benefit from was the initial rescue capsule was basically just an aluminum tube that you could put the guy in and bring him up, but it could take anywhere from a half hour to 4 hours to bring him up. So one of the things that Craig, based on his Navy experience mostly, but certainly some of the NASA work, was to make sure that they had oxygen, they had a way to get rid of CO2 with a fan, that they had live two-way video communications with them, that they had an exercise platform, that they could do heel pumps just to try to mitigate some of the orthostatic intolerance. I'm in for a lot of that.
Rick, I hope you're getting closer because we're really, yeah.
Well, I'm sure you directed that to me when you saw me carry this thing up here, but JD as always has a lot to say, and I didn't want to sell him short. But bottom line is, JD and the team would definitely defer the success of the mission to the Chileans, okay? And the team was very humble, but the real success in that was tied in large part to the operational knowledge and the science that we get from NASA. So with that, I'll finish.
Thanks, Rick. I hate to do that, but it's a great story, and if you get a chance sometime to hear Rick or JD or one of the guys that were really close to it talk about it, it's a fantastic presentation. Ben?
I was just going to say, JD's presentation should be on USRA.com and go to Aerospace Medicine Grand Rounds. The full presentation is on that. And if you want to go to that, it's USRA.com. Aerospace Medicine Grand Rounds.
You get charged extra for that advertisement, you know that. So.
Thanks, Neil. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ben Levine. I'm a cardiologist and cardiovascular physiologist from Dallas. I'm the cardiovascular team lead for NSPRI, and I've been a long-time investigator with research projects for NASA. I want to talk about a few things specifically related to cardiovascular medicine and what we've learned in space and how it's relevant for life on Earth. And I wasn't here yesterday. In fact, I spent the day in the coronary care unit with a critically ill young woman who had a left ventricular assist device. Do you all know what those are? She had fulminant myocarditis. Her aortic valve would not even open when her heart squeezed, all in a period of 2 or 3 weeks, catastrophically ill. And we put a mechanical heart, effectively. And these devices have become quite small, and this one has a centrifugal pump that is non-pulsal. So these patients, and this has become quite common now, these patients have no pulse. You can't feel a pulse. You can't measure their blood pressure. And one of the things that's very unique about it that had not been recognized until quite recently is that the absence of pulsal flow in the circulation causes really big problems. And this woman was fainting. She couldn't stand up. And we've been now working with Thortec, the major company that makes these devices, to increase the amount of pulsatility, and that's based on work that we did in Neurolab, which identified the fact that the reduction in pulsatility, the reduction in stroke volume during spaceflight, was a key component of the sympathetic activation and post-flight orthostatic intolerance. So my lab has been quite interested in that whole concept, that is, what happens to the heart during long-duration spaceflight or long-duration deconditioning. And the bottom line is that the heart gets smaller and stiffer. It doesn't pump as much, and it can't pump as much blood out into the circulation. And so when astronauts come back down on Earth, their hearts are small, they can't pump very much, gravity sucks blood into their feet, and they pass out. And they develop a syndrome where their heart rates are very, very high and they're lightheaded. Well, it turns out that a lot of people on Earth have that same condition. It's called POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's been around for a long time. About 500,000 young women have that condition. And we're renaming that. We're going to call it the Grinch Syndrome. For those of you non-Americans, the Grinch is a children's story, and his main problem was his heart was 2 sizes too small. And so based on some work that we've done with NSBRI in our bed rest studies, we said, okay, if the problem is that the heart's too small, how do you fix the problem? Well, you make it bigger. How do you make a heart bigger? Well, you exercise. And the best way to make a heart bigger is by rowing. Why rowing? Rowers have the biggest hearts of any athletes. Each time you pull, blood pressure goes up. It's a big stimulus to the heart. So in a recently completed bed rest study, we showed that if you row, you don't have to stand up. You can do it sitting down. That's a pretty nice advantage. We completely prevented the cardiovascular deconditioning with bed rest. And so we said, well, what if we did that to our POTS patients? And so with a combination of NSBRI and NIH funding, we did a big study that was published last year showing that we can completely cure these women. In fact, 2/3 of them were completely cured of the syndrome. And you have to understand how debilitated these young women are. We had one woman who was formerly a ballet dancer in Austin who had not been upright for more than 2 years. When she stood up, her heart rate was 160. She could stand for about 2.5 minutes. And her parents had her in a supine wheelchair, dragging her all around the country. Within 3 months of starting our program, she was upright. She had returned to dancing, and she choreographed her own ballet, which was performed in February. So it's a compelling outcome derived exclusively from work that we've done to support work in space. And I want to finish with a little bit of both historical perspective and moving forward, because I came to Dallas to work with Gunnar Blomqvist and Jerry Mitchell, my mentors, and one of the first bed rest studies ever done was done in Dallas in the 1960s by Bengt Saltin and Gunnar and Jerry, and they put 5 young men to bed for 3 weeks and then trained them for 2 months, and much of what we know about the adaptive capacity of the circulation comes from that study. Well, a few years ago we found those same 5 guys, the most intensively studied men in the history of medicine, and we brought them back to Dallas 30 years later. And not a single one, not one person was in worse shape after 30 years of aging than they were after 3 weeks of bed rest. So 3 weeks of bed rest is worse for the body's ability to do physical work than 30 years of aging. And that has led us now into, well, if you exercise while you're in bed and you can prevent cardiovascular deconditioning, what happens when you exercise over a lifetime? Can you prevent the cardiovascular consequences of sedentary aging? And we're well into that work and have been able to show that if you're a lifetime exerciser, at least at the level of a master's athlete, you can completely prevent many of the cardiovascular effects of aging. So it's great work that has been stimulated by our work for NASA and our bed rest models, and I think it's directly relevant to life on Earth.
Thank you, Ben. That was a very, very exciting story. Sarah Lynn?
Good Good morning. I'm Sarah Lynn Mark, medical advisor to Rich Williams, who's the Chief Health Medical Officer at NASA headquarters, and I'm delighted to be here today. As an endocrinologist and a geriatrician, I view space as a wonderful platform to study accelerated aging. And one of the areas that I'm most particularly interested in is sex and gender differences. Now, when I use the term sex, I'm using the Institute of Medicine definition, which is really looking at it at the most basic chromosomal level, the differences between men and women. Gender tends to imply more of a psychosocial construct. We heard today some differences in regard to bone and heart, and I just want to highlight a few of that. The area of sex and gender-based medicine is often rife with controversy. It's sometimes used as a means for discrimination, who's better, who's smarter, who's faster. And I think that has to go out of the equation. We're really looking at similarities and differences so we can best tailor healthcare, and I think the space program has significantly helped us do that. And as we move into the realm of personalized medicine, it will become more and more important. We've already done that for aging as a human factor. Race is another area of controversy, but I think we have to look at sex and gender. For just a few seconds, I know you're counting the clock, Neil, let's just talk for a second about, we said osteoporosis. We know that 80% of those afflicted on Earth tend to be women, but what most people don't realize is that men are the ones who have higher death rates after a hip fracture. So what we're learning in space will certainly help us as we especially look at the use of bisphosphonates, potential use of that therapy in atraumatic fractures, and what will be the impact on men and women will be important for what we do here on Earth. We heard the issues regarding cardiovascular disease. Invariably, almost all our female astronauts have orthostatic intolerance. We see it in small frame men. We know that there is differences in vascular reactivity between men and women. We certainly heard about the cardiac differences, and diastolic dysfunction is more of an issue in women, and I think it will come to be an important role as we better treat men and women in centuries and generations to come. Another important area is the neurological changes. We know the corpus callosum is very active in women. We see neuroplasticity in space plays a very important role, and we're certainly seeing it here on Earth for those who've had any kind of brain trauma. They've had strokes. We see increased ability to regain speech in women. And again, some of the lessons that we've learned from space, I think, have played an important role there. Immunological system in aging, we see bone marrow suppression. We see this in space. The sex differences are certainly important. Just recently, we all encountered H1N1. We hypothesized that women would be more resistant to infection, but once they got infected, they would mount very robust responses, and we certainly saw that. And I think we'll have important lessons to learn from space and immunosuppression and looking at these sex differences. Reproductive system's an easy one. We know there are differences, but for example, in space, we see increased incidence of nephrolithiasis, kidney stones in men. So beginning to understand that will help us to treat our patients better on Earth. We have fluid shifts. As you mentioned, Neil, there's interest in pharmacokinetics and dynamics in space. Well, we have that interest here on Earth. 8 out of 10 drugs were pulled because they were actually more toxic in women. And again, space will give us an ideal platform to study that. And then just finally, to end on behavioral aspects. I mean, that's one area that I think is extremely exciting. The differences in how men and women deal with stress, we know is significant. We see it from a hormonal milieu, but also how men and women communicate. We heard last night the magnificent results from the 500-day experiment. I think it would be extremely interesting to see how perhaps an all-female 500-day experiment would go, but perhaps more interesting would be a mixed gender crew, and it certainly would have application in diverse work environments, certainly for the military, and I know certainly for space exploration. So I hope you can see that looking at sex and gender-based healthcare from space has both important application both on Earth and for the worlds that we will explore. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Lynn. Well, thanks to all the speakers, and we're open for some questions here, and we do have some time, believe it or not. So please use the microphones, and if there aren't any questions there, I will. Yes, sir, Bud.
So I want to pick up on something that Dr. Dinges raised. Dr. Dinges raised about lighting. As many of you may know, the ISS has faced a lighting crisis. It will go dark by 2015 if nothing is done. Fortunately, JSC has led the way on developing a replacement LED-based lighting system, and that's been the work of many people, Dr. Leviton and Smith Johnson and many other engineers at Johnson Space Center. So our research at NSBRI, as well as for NASA, has been focused on this issue for lighting. And the point is this panel is addressing Earth benefits. This past week in Philadelphia, the lighting engineers of the United States gathered some 20,000 representatives of the lighting community, and they really looked to the data emergent out of NASA for looking at how they will use LEDs in Earth-based environments. So this is a sort of an ongoing success story that the technologies being developed and deployed for station actually are guiding how it's going to be used here on Earth. And I just thought that would be a useful thing to be aware of.
Other comments?
Sue Bloomfield, Texas A&M University. Thanks to all the presenters and the organizers. This was a very, very useful session. I myself, and I've seen many other people, scribbling notes. In my mind, if there were no other outcome of this meeting, tangible walkaway, if we could simply have one office compile 20 of the many, many suggestions we've heard from this panel in a bullet list with links to more information, that would be incredibly useful. I think everyone in this room has a vested interest in translating to the public and to the taxpayers in our individual countries the value of space research. And if we had that bullet list on the web that we could refer to, it would be tremendously helpful.
Thank you. Others? I had one question with regard to I was always fascinated about telemedicine. When I got to NASA, I was well along in my career. I'm not a long time. I was at NASA for 17 years. But telemedicine was hitting its strides, and there was a lot of activity, surrounding the development of some of the technologies. And it's interesting listening to Dr. Helmers, and I'd like to just go back to one thing on that. And I can see from the technologies that I remember that there was a tremendous emphasis on diagnosis. And in these remote areas, we know that there are real problems with contact with physicians. And so what is this next stage as far as how they're going to do treatment into those remote areas? We have them here in Texas. I mean, I don't have to go, I don't even have to go to India. I don't have to go to sub-Saharan Africa or anything. I was at MD Anderson Cancer Center for 7 years, and there were areas of Texas where the nearest doctor was 125 miles. And so, what's the next phase in trying to get treatments distributed sufficiently so that because some of these people you can't transport very easily. The families don't have the wherewithal to be able to do that. So is there any strategies afoot for that, or am I just pipe dreaming here? That was David I was asking. He's probably looking at me and saying, why don't you go away?
So, Neil,
I'm sorry.
It's interesting, these presentations, and I completely agree with what Sue had to say. This session was invaluable, and really having access to a capsulization of what came out of this session would be very, very useful, because we all struggle with explaining to our friends, our family, our neighbors why this is relevant, why we invest in this way. But to your question, Sarah Lynn and I took the shuttle ride yesterday, and this came up in our conversation. How do you translate the unique needs of space station and space travel to the third world countries that desperately need low-tech solutions? And it's exactly what you said. And we don't even have to go to third world countries. We go to rural areas, underserved areas in the United States. The drive to miniaturize and make it robust and make it inexpensive enough that it can be deployed is key in this. And I think this is an area of opportunity for NASA to follow up. It would be a tremendous success story to take these technologies in that direction, just as you described.
Thanks. Also, David had a comment here, too. David?
Yeah, in
Scott,
regards to this.
No worries. I think that there's two things. One of which is you touched on within the United States doing this, and we have medical, legal, and we have financial constraints with doing that right now that we haven't worked through. And I know a lot of us are very interested in robotics. My hospital has more robots than any hospital in the country. We're the busiest place right now. Interestingly, current robotic technology actually makes things more expensive and more complicated. So until we get through the next generation or two of robotics, I think that that's a sort of a poor solution right now. I wouldn't discount, however, the ability to remotely telementor minimally skilled individuals in how to do very complex procedures. We did a lot of this on the KC-135 and the C-9, where we had folks who were trained for 5 minutes performing surgical procedures with guidance. Of course, Christian Otto and I did the same thing when he's an ER doc. Geez, they have all thumbs in that, and I was able to get him through a remotely guided appendectomy, and that. See, Salazan Sharipov in the audience became a spectacular ultrasonographer with almost no training. So I think that our astronaut crews, our remote villagers are our most precious asset. They don't need a lot of power, they don't take up a lot of space, and they don't break down frequently. And so I think that utilizing them with the interface of the expert to the minimally trained individual is critical.
Carl had one, and then David Dinges.
Yeah, I think this is an area of tremendous application in the future. One of the big challenges, though, is establishing the communication links into remote areas. Telesat in Canada has a number of pilot schemes into the northern parts of Canada, and it's established some bases, and this then becomes very good outreach into the community, but keeping the technical skills available to operate the remote center, not the medical ones, but the technical ones, is a challenge that is a problem because people want to move on.
Yeah, I think I just want to add that I think that for now the mentoring using telemedicine is a very valuable skill. There's always going to be a difficulty managing complications. If you're trying to do a complex procedure in an area where there's not many resources, that managing the complications is going to be really difficult. And then, of course, when we talk about using telemedicine or robotics for long deep space missions, the time delay becomes a real problem and makes it, even a very small time delay makes it very difficult to do some of these intricate procedures.
I was just going to add that I think the telemedicine area will begin primarily using telemedicine techniques for symptom tracking and potentially even some diagnostic evaluation to determine whether a patient needs to be seen or brought in. That's probably where it'll begin. It could also lead us to what I call objective epidemiology, which is instead of this endless reliance on what people tell you in these huge public health, critically important public health surveys on where disease is or why weight is high in one area or not another, we could actually we could use telemedicine in a way to get objective information on the status of people that gives us some reliability, so we know that we don't have so much error in the estimates we're now using based on self-report. And finally, medication compliance. The NIH estimates in the United States that half of healthcare budget could be reduced if patients simply did what they were told to do, meaning took their medicine, used their procedures, and this behavioral component is massive, and we need better ways to objectively track adherence and understand when it fails, why it fails, and how to help people do what they should be doing.
Yeah, I want to first point out to Jeff Sutton that all the comments and questions are coming from the right side of the room today. But I have a question for Shiaki. We I think have a great opportunity here because space travelers have to be in the space environment as part of their work, and exposes them to oxidative stress and radiation that they wouldn't otherwise have. And so I think this is a great opportunity to learn about the effects of radiation in a worker, because we have a problem with nuclear reactor accidents in your country, that we could really use space physiology very well to understand this problem and hopefully mitigate it. So you talked about yesterday wanting to understand the radiobiology better, but is it just because you want to fly in space again and you want to have a good rationale to do that, or are you interested in developing countermeasures, as Jim Tour talked about in his session, and what's important here, and can we use space to help advance this very important scientific endeavor and have it apply to the terrestrial problems?
We've got to be real quick here because Dr. Alfred
I think
is closing us
that
down.
issue is very important, and I really want to understand the issue more to help the people, because so many people right now in Japan are suffering from the radiation issue because the radiation level is not high, but the many people, because of the less of knowledge, that's why the people are very much afraid of radiation itself. So I think the space program, one of the benefit from the space program is if we have enough data accumulated internationally, that database will be able to help to develop some countermeasures, which not only for the astronaut but also the people on the ground. And you asked about my experience in space. Of course, I have some eye flashes or something like that. But actually, the situation is I don't know if I have developed more cancers or something like that.
Right.
So yet,
we're going to ask you to continue this discussion outside of here. I have one thing to add besides just thanking all the attendees and the panelists for the effort here. I really enjoyed doing it myself. I hope it was good for you. I would like to have another time when we do this again, and we'll spend some time talking about how we really need to continue to rebuild the foundation of fundamental knowledge, basic science, that's going to underwrite new ideas and new technologies and new ways to get things to emerge from space to the Earth. So I didn't get on my soapbox this time, but I will promise that if you ask me to do this again, I will ride that soapbox. Thank you.